And our first adjuster type is what we generically will call a flood adjuster. Okay, notice they have on their waders. This is really just representing they're dealing with claims involving rising water. Then we have our generic property adjuster. They have their umbrella representing when it comes to weather and water, they mostly deal with top-down water. For example, water that has not hit the ground, hasn't become surface or groundwater, at least in most cases. But like many things in the insurance world, the property world, there will be some exceptions, and that is when it can get confusing. So, very nice to meet you, right? Let's take some time to learn about each other's role in the claim handling world as it goes along with this topic today. Remember, this is very high level, doesn't address all types of flood carriers or adjusters. And for the most part, we're referring to claims for residences and condos and not complex commercial claims. All right, so flood adjusters who are qualified to handle flood claims may also handle property claims during periods when there are no floods, right? So for flood claim handling, there are a few different avenues, and here are the most common. First, and maybe the most common, is work directly for FEMA under the NFIP or the National Flood Insurance Program, which we covered earlier, sometimes called NFIP Direct. But don't forget about those write your own carriers we talked about as well. Property adjusters come in many forms. The two most common categories are staff adjusters who work directly for the insurance carriers, or independent adjusters, or IAs for short. IAs can work for one or many carriers. They could work for themselves or be part of an independent adjusting firm. So NFIP and WIO flood adjusters only handle FEMA flood claims, and they too are generally IAs. This could be residential or commercial and include both building items and content items. But both categories are strictly limited. And a $300,000 home might have the exact same coverage limits as a multi-million-dollar home. Property adjusters, on the other hand, can handle residential and commercial claims, but depending on the policy and how it was written, they could be working with multiple different policy types, and they could have and do have much higher limits in most cases. Flood adjusters adjust claims based on a specific flood policy, and the NFIP and WIOs use one policy alone with very narrow coverages, and that policy was developed and is maintained by the NFIP and the federal government. Whereas most property adjusters could be dealing with multiple policy types or policies that have many options for endorsements. Those could add, remove, generally change the coverage or the coverage limits. Many property policies today are open peril and cover the many causes of loss unless it's specifically excluded. Remember, this isn't meant to be a policy class, and we're speaking in very high general terms, but just to help you differentiate the roles of flood versus property adjusters. To be qualified to be a FEMA NFIP flood adjuster, the person must have a minimum of 4 years experience handling property claims. And they also must participate in an annual FEMA training class or classes that equals about 4 hours annually. They work from the FEMA flood guide, which last time I looked at it was over 300 pages long. And they probably get additional training from the IA firm if they're working with one of those. Property adjusters may or may not need a license to handle claims, and that depends on what state or states they're handling claims in. If they do have a license, likely they need to maintain those by participating in trainings like this one today to gain your continuing education credits, which for most states is you have to get a certain number over a course of usually 2-year period. Of course, there are differences and other differences. There are other similarities, but this outlines some of the higher points for our purposes today.